and welcome to our show of today, which has as content men's issues. Altogether, it's about intimate relationships, and that's why I'm here together with Mark, and I take part of that. I am a relationship coach and a voice coach, and we are doing retreats here in our house about relationships, and so is Mark. And today we have a special guest, Raymond Fismer. He is German, and he is a board member of the German Integrales Forum, it is called in German. He originally is a physicist, but he has discovered his passion to help men in our current society to find themselves, to develop themselves. And today's topic is men's issues in relationship. So welcome, Raymond.
Yes, welcome, Heidi and Mark, and thank you very much for the invitation to this talk.
You are very welcome. And as it is about men, I will give you the word.
Okay.
And maybe sometimes I will sneak in.
I hope you usually do. It's all right. Yes.
Yes.
And of course,
we'll accept her here, huh?
Absolutely, you bet. I was so happy to see the topic as men's issues in relationships. And in my introduction, when I posted and tried to attract viewers from my circles, I said something like, we talk about men's issues in relationships, and then half-jokingly, finally, you know? Because when we talk about relationships, it seems like we assume that this is girl talk somehow, that that women will be talking about relationships, and men will be talking about some common tasks we have to do together. So, welcome, Raymond. I'm so glad this is your specialty, and I'm really looking forward to this talk.
Yes, no, but you're right. That's the thing I encounter still very often, that many men say, and I believe the same for a long time, that, well, you can't really talk with men, and if you want to talk, it's much better to face women, to talk with them. They are more specialists in this. Well, but I can tell you the one activity I'm leading for men since 12 years now. We have a yearly gathering here in Bremen where about 60 to 70 men come together in what we call Männerkulturtag, that is Men's Culture Day, where we have a day of workshops and so on. And there are always about 1/3 of men who are new there for the first time. So that is 2/3 of the men come back. But of these newbies, many say, oh, I had been interested in this for long years, but I didn't dare to go there because, well, what should men talk together for a whole day? I wondered. But now as I'm here, it's fantastic. It's so easy and fine and relaxing to talk among men.
Yeah, I can relate to that because we had a retreat here a couple months ago, and for the first time we invited men and women, couples or singly, to the retreat to talk about relationships between men and women. And I found it easier to talk to a mixed group than I have found it to talk to a men's group. And that's just, you know, where my history is and where I'm coming from. But I think it's a very common phenomenon.
Absolutely.
So,
talking about relationships.
Yes, exactly.
What values do you think are important for relationships, and what role has the man in relationships?
Wow.
I think, well, for values, I think many of us people today who engage in such subjects and so on, many of the values are, well, wanting to communicate, wanting to understand the other, wanting to build up a real understanding and empathic relationship. But we must be aware that that certainly is not the same values for everybody in this planet or even in these countries. There are many couples who are perfectly happy with other values, where in all the classical stuff, where, for example, the man goes to work and he comes home and wants his silence and his food there and his television. And as we all know, people can live for decades in this way without really communicating and be fairly happy with this. But okay, I think we are mostly people who have developed somehow in their life story other values and now really want to lead relationships on a equal level, man and the woman.
I can relate.
Go
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the main point I think I understood is that we really, if we have these vision of such a relationship of equality and communication, we still have to develop our capacities really to be able to live such a relationship. It's not natural to have these capacities.
I can relate to those changes because I got married at a rather young age. I had just barely turned 21, and that was a long time ago, believe me. And but my relationship with my first wife for the first 5 or 6 years seemed really ideal, you know. And looking back now, I understand that in a sense, I wasn't including her as a person. I was doing what I wanted, and she was, because of her background, was basically submitting and accepting my leadership in the relationship and just following along, including, you know, moving to another country for a year. There was no question about whether or not she would follow me. But eventually that she grew tired of that and started to grow up, and then the relationship between us deteriorated. And so we, in subsequent relationships, we weren't doing that marriage again. We had new and better mistakes to make, shall we say. And eventually, of course, I've met Heidi after we were both familiar with Integral. And we were open to experimenting in a kind of impersonal way with new ways of relating. And it has been most rewarding, most fulfilling, and sometimes quite scary. But it has moved forward. It's wonderful.
So what I would like to know, what are these new skills that people need to have happy relationships?
Well, I think one of the basic skills is really to, let's call it empathy, to be able to not only to see my own attitudes and position, but to try to understand or to be able to understand what the other person is thinking and why this is so. And that she has a right to be different than me.
Excuse me. Isn't that for women and men in the same time? I mean, it is always good that we recognize the right for the other to be as they are, you know. So what is specific for men?
I think you're right. This is a demand that's quite similar for women and for men. But I think there's coming from our normal cultural background, it's a bit a greater step for most men to achieve this, because classically in our culture, women are, as we said in the beginning, those who are competent much more for, well, everything that has to do with relationships, with communication, with understanding. If you look at girls or young women being together all the time with their friends and chatting and discussing and so on, while many young men are much more on their own. Or if they are together, it's not so much about understanding and talking, it's about doing something. And that's the classical way most of us as men grew up and were taught how it's perfect to be a man. So it's these communication skills are something quite unfamiliar to most men, usually. So
That's
I think
true.
there's a real main difference.
Yeah. If I can interrupt, I am very familiar with this switch. It's been going on for some time, but I recently had an example of this in a dream. I was in a kind of a classroom situation. I wasn't really sure what the relationship was. And there was a woman leading this class or this meeting or this gathering. And we were all men in the audience, as students or whatever we were. And one of the men got up and said something very derogatory to the teacher. And I felt it, and I said, like I felt it like a knife in my own heart to hear that from him. This was a relatively new experience. It was sort of, the guys were ganging up on the woman, you know, but I was feeling what the woman felt, you know, and that was, I took that as a sign of emotional progress on my part. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. The ability for compassion.
Yeah.
Somehow.
It wasn't automatic in the past, you know, necessarily.
I wonder, what could you tell men? How could they learn these new communication skills, these new relationship skills? And first, excuse me, why should they? What is the benefit of it? Can you name this clearly?
Well, benefit, I think if you really pursue these values we talked about at the beginning, you want a relationship that is not top down, but really on men and women on the same level and being partners in a real sense. I think you can only achieve this with these communication skills by building them, learning them somehow. So that's the thing you will profit. You can profit from it. And on the other side, in my experience, it's simply fantastic for yourself, not only for the relationship, to develop more relation with yourself, with your feelings, your emotions, with understanding and so on. It's, I think, the most fantastic journey you can go to well, there are no new countries to be where you can go to today. You can discover also, but you can discover really a lot and have great adventures by discovering your inner self. That was really, I think, the most fantastic and demanding journey I did in my life up to now.
Good.
Yeah, that's
good.
That's wonderful. And once again, I can relate to that progress in my own life. I remember in the 60s and early 70s telling my friends that I was really envious of women who were stepping out and making a change in their own lives, really doing something daring and revolutionary, and expanding themselves to something so much more than what their former roles were. And I wanted to do that too, but I didn't know how. I didn't have any men who were role models for me in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in politics or some other things, but not in this really personal, emotional sense. And so what I found really helpful in my life is that I've been learning from women how to do this. You know,
we were patient enough.
Thank you for your patience. Yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this has been accelerated in my relationship with you because we came together with distinct commitments to do this with one another, and I have learned. I have found a safe way, let's put it that way, to move forward in this exploration. You know, it's not always safe, but I know generally it's safe. We can trust each other to make mistakes. We can trust each other even if we hurt each other's feelings or, you know, make some real boo-boos. That the relationship is solid and we can move forward. And I'm simply not the person I used to be. And there's so much more to me. I discovered I got released from that bondage, just like the women, you know, got released from their bondage a few decades ago. And,
I think this is very interesting, and I hope that some men will be inspired by what you're talking about.
Wow.
I want to bring the discussion back on men's issues. So far we talked about what a man might learn to create a relationship a la pari, how do you say, in the same level between man and woman. What other men's issues are there, and what do you find in your work with men? I could imagine maybe sexual issues, or what is it?
Of course, the attitude towards sexuality, for example, is a decisive thing that will change in your development. I think from let's say being mostly attracted simply by women in, let's say it frankly, as an object of my lust, my desire, which is the classical way. I want to get rid of some kind of tension inside me, and moving forward to really getting into contact with the other person and really feeling what does she feel at this moment. And in the end, it turns out to be much more fulfilling for me too. If you really engage in a real exchange and a relationship there. So I'd say a main point there, it's to realize that it's not only about fulfilling my will and my desires and seeing my partner as somebody who is responsible to give me this. The partner to be responsible for making me happy, and if she doesn't, she's the wrong one, and I'll kick her off and look for the next one. What often happens, you see, I'm doing couples counseling too, and that's the main point. Most couples, and that's not only the men, the women alike, they come there and say implicitly, please change my partner, make her understand this and that, and then we'll be happy. But that's not how it really works. First, we can't change the partner, and in a relationship, you cannot change your partner. The only thing you really can work on and try to change is yourself, your attitudes. And this is, I think, a decisive point to realize and to understand that you have to question yourself, for example, why I am frustrated, why I am not happy, what is it that makes me unhappy? And you have the decisive tool really in the end to decide I want to be happy and to go for it. And
that's a good one.
to go for it. This
Yeah.
is an active thing, to go for it. Because what you said, Raymond, before, it was giving your power away when you expect
Exactly.
your happiness from another person. So you are dependent on what another person does or not does. So you are not powerful. You have no power, you know, because somebody else is reigning over your happiness. So you can get your power back by going for it, as you said. Doing yourself the work which needs to be done to become happy.
Yes, and there was work to be done, indeed. And one of the things that I had to go for was accepting that I was no longer a young man, that I was, you know, I was 70 when we met. And sex at 70 is not the same as the sex at 20 or 30 or even 40 or 50. You know, it just really changes. And I could not expect the same kind of just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, you know, lust, you know, relationship that was so exciting and seemed like the ideal kind of relationship with a woman. You know, and expecting the woman, of course, to be equally, you know, frantic about reaching an orgasm, blah, blah, blah. And if that didn't happen, that means we had no chemistry. There was nothing going on. And
Yes.
oh my, what has happened is that by realizing that you can have sex without being directed toward orgasm, that can go on for hours. You know, and be so fulfilling and so comforting and so, and again, I'm going to throw in this, so safe, you know, where you don't have an image of yourself on the line that you have to maintain, and there's a fulfillment there that in our work with people we described as a relationship beyond our wildest dreams, because we could not have projected from our earlier ideas of a sexual relationship what it could be like once some of these younger what would I say? Younger ideas about how sex should be were dropped. Fantastic.
No, I can. I think my experiences in these last years, perhaps in the last decade or so, is quite similar. Exactly this state of reaching a kind of sexual contact where it's not about orgasm, but it's about something more, nurturing, more important even than an orgasm. And that's something, most young men would never believe. They are so, you're usually so driven by your driver to more this notion of getting rid of something than for me nowadays. I think it's much more important to stay and to be in this energy, because it's so much life energy, this arousal, not to get rid of it, to get over it, but really to stay in it and cultivate it.
So can I ask something from the perspective of the woman? If this is so, that young men have much more the drive, you know, that they have to unload themselves, isn't it then what we are talking about possible only of a certain age? What would you think? Or what would you say? It's the same question in another way. What would you tell to young people who have maybe problems with sexual life because the women have other ideas or whatever? You know?
I don't think that it's really only depending on age. Certainly there are these figures you can read, in that the testosterone level is higher in young men and so on. But anyhow, if you look how different young men are not one is like the other. So I think it's much more conditioned by, well, your cultural background, by what you were taught and what you learned. And so I'm quite convinced that even young men can really make these experiences if they change their attitude, their way of looking at sexuality. But I'm convinced too that it's a kind of progress. I think most young men go through the stage. First, where sex is simply about an attractive object on which you can unload your stress. But you can go through this and can go beyond this. And I think that's the main point, that men as women realize that their development doesn't stop when they're 21. Then they're adult and will stay so until they are 70 and someday die. But frankly, life really starts then. And you have fantastic possibilities of development. You only have to pursue them. That's, I think, what we can offer in men's work. If you speak together, communicate with other men and learn from them, exchange with them.
Yeah, I rather expect that individually we will probably always be going through some stages before we get to a certain level of maturity and a certain perspective. But we can help one another go through these stages more quickly, more healthily, without doing so much harm to both ourselves and to our relationships and really to the world, along the way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that even for young people, it's interesting to listen to the stories of older people. And I could imagine that older people can be inspired a lot by younger people. What do you think? I mean, men, we're talking about men.
I'm trying to put myself in that position because older men never told me anything. Well, older women didn't either. But, this was strictly a self-taught project, talking strictly with peers at best, and then when I was really young, I got my real information about sex from Playboy. They actually told me more than I could learn anyplace else, through those pages. So it's to be really wonderful if the evolution of sex could just be part of education. What we talked about openly in families, transgenerational. Like we talk about all kinds of stories with one another.
And I understand that, Raymond, you are doing this, in your work with men. This exchange of experience and this opening up and allow the other to participate at the experience of the other. So that's no more a taboo, the men don't have to be anymore like they have to be, and they cannot say anything because something might not be seen right. So I wonder, could you tell us how and where you are doing this work and what your next event might be, your website, we can see it here, and how people can reach you when they're interested to work with you?
Yes, although I'm sorry, up to now my website is only in German, so it's only accessible for those able to read German.
No, you can put in Google Translator and they can still read it.
It's a little funny sometimes. It's good.
The project I'm working on in the last years, and I hope really to finish in this summer or autumn at last, is a book I've been writing about the development of masculinity. Because it's a bit of what we've been talking about at the beginning, that there are different stages of development. And masculinity is not only one concept, but if you look into it in more detail, there are several different, let's say, role types of masculinity you find in our society, which is very confusing, especially for young men. They don't know, am I now to be the strong fighter Superman, or am I to be successful businessman, or am I to be what my nanny is telling me, to be communicative? And it's very irritating for them. But these images are, they all have their right of existence by themselves, because they belong to different levels of the development. Mm-hmm. And okay, that's a central thesis I'm following, and well, I've lined out this in my book, which first in German, but I've now realized with all these contacts in the last months that it's absolutely necessary to have a translation in English in short time. Well, and
yes.
Sorry.
I would look forward to an English translation.
He doesn't know German, so only English.
Well, Italian. No. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, would be good, really. Yeah. And do you do some course or some? You talked about a meeting where there are so many men coming together. When is it?
Mm-hmm. This meeting here in Bremen, it's once a year. It's every year in March. So the next one is already scheduled for the March the 8th, I think, next year. And it especially has a focus on
International Day of the Women, 8th of March. This is good.
That was this year. We had it exactly on March the 8th, on the International Women's Day. Yeah. Okay. But the next year we have especially a focus on the subject of joyful masculinity, sexuality, health, and so on. These subjects. Each year we have a motto for this meeting. Yes, that's, it's still a bit away, but one of the next big events. And what I'm doing is workshops where you can really experience these different levels of development of your masculinity. Mm-hmm. Or a month ago now in Budapest, I did the same for not only men, but for a mixed group. With women, because it works the same way for women too. And it's fascinating if you take this idea for relationship, because both men and women have their different levels of development they bring into every relationship. And you don't only meet on the, let's say, your conscious highest level of being communicative and so on, but all the time you still react with your old habits of being, for example, the man wanting to show that he's the strongest, the dominant, and the woman perhaps being seductive or so on. And these patterns still play a large role in all our relationships. We can't simply ignore this.
No.
Yeah, and we have been in your workshop in Budapest, and it was very, very nice. And I really recommend to everybody to get into contact with Raymond and go for one of these workshops. It's really a deep experience, and you get to know so much about yourself.
Oh, really. My goodness. Yes, Raymond, when you played the rock and roll for the first time, I just exploded with energy. It took me right back, 40 years, 50 years. It was wonderful.
I think we have to wrap up now.
Yes, we do. I'm sorry to say. Yeah. But Raymond, this has been wonderful, and I want you to put me on your mailing list for these things too. And so glad to talk with you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And we see another time for another talk about couples, men's issues, women's issues, and all together.
So much more to say. So much more. Yes.
Thank you all the listeners, and be tuned. We will do some other session about relationships and men's issues. And women's issues maybe too, but there's so much already said about women, so we leave a little bit more space to you men.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.